Carlos Nelson with Cascade Media Group, and today we're on our education channel. We have a young man, Joe Nelson, that is preparing to run for the Kansas City School District. Welcome to the show, Joe.
All right, thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, let's get down to where the tire meets the road.
Let's
My
do it.
people don't know you and they nosy. Let's go back.
Right.
Let's go back to kindergarten. Tell our people where you went to school, some of the mentors that you've had in your life, and then we'll get up to where you're at now. They need a
Okay.
background. FBI,
Background.
CIA.
All right. All the way back to kindergarten. All right. So originally from New York City, grew up in New Jersey, and that's where I went to school, Hillside, right next to Newark. Some mentors. So I'll go with my childhood hero. I was little bit of a nerd, a lot of bit of a nerd. Benjamin Manaker was somebody I followed a lot as a kid, as far as historical figures go. And then when you look at later in life, some mentors I have, definitely my father, who has my same name, Joseph Nelson, um, and no relation to Carlos Nelson, by the way.
I don't
Um,
know. Let me say to you, you know
well,
I'm from New
maybe.
York.
All
And, hold it. And the other part of the Nelsons are in Jersey.
yeah, that's what. Yeah, well, we'll have to figure that one out after. But yeah, a lot of military background. So I went to the Naval Academy. A lot of mentors that were in the upper ranks as far as it goes there. And then worked in Wall Street for a few years before I came out to Kansas City during the pandemic, and I've been hitting the ground running ever since. So that's it in a nutshell. I can dig deeper, but you
No,
said kindergarten, so I jumped to college, but
what college did you go to?
Naval Academy. So
Naval Academy
Annapolis,
down in
Maryland.
Annapolis.
Yep, yep.
Yeah, I
So the
used to
movie
live in Long,
retirees
Maryland
and
also.
yeah, yeah, yep.
My
Good
kids
old
are up there
DMV.
went to Maryland Eastern Shore. They live in
Uh-huh.
Upper
Yep.
Marlboro right now.
Yeah, yeah, Eastern Shore. Yeah, yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Know
all
all about
right.
it. Yep.
So uh, tell our audience a little bit about why you want to run for Kansas City School District.
Yeah, the story is pretty simple. I found out that the kids were out of school, and I called a teacher friend, and I was like, "Why?" Like, I see because I'm running around the city and working on different projects. I'm like, "Why are all the kids outside?" Like, I don't understand. Aren't they in school? Because I do a lot of mentoring as well. So I'm like, "Wait, why aren't the kids like I see kids everywhere?" And I'm like, they were like, "Oh, they got let out because the air conditioning wasn't working." I was like, "Oh, it must have overheated." Because I'm thinking I follow, climate change, and I'm like, "Oh, maybe it was too hot and it couldn't keep up." So that's what I'm thinking. And it's like, no, there's no AC at all. And I was like, "Wait, what?" And this is a shot at all the folks when I first moved here, they're like, "Oh, you got to become a Chiefs fan." I was like, "Okay, well, like let's see what happens, right?" But how are we the two-time champs at the time, right? And we don't have AC in the schools. Like that doesn't. Like my brain was like, I don't
Doesn't
like.
compute.
I was like, this doesn't make any sense. And so I started digging into it, and I've done a lot of community workshops. So Center for Neighborhoods, UMKC, they have a great program. And so I was over there, and I was like, they have a newsletter that they send out every week, and there was something about a tax levy, and I was like, let me go check this out. So I learned about the tax levy and the DSEG case. And then I saw pictures of the schools. And I had already been working in a lot of the schools as an academic coach because I've done a lot of math. My background is in engineering. So I would always help different kids in math, high school, middle school. And so I'd already had seen some of the, I guess, the gaps in what was being learned, but a lot of it was attributed to COVID. We can't attribute all of this to the pandemic. We can't. It's beyond that scope. And so I spoke up at a school. Actually, the next school board meeting I went just to be a fly on the wall, and they were talking about all the different challenges and the $600 million at the time, it's higher now, but the $600 million gap in operations funding, deferred maintenance. And I'm like, again, we just built a new Ferris wheel. We hosted the NFL draft. We're about to host the World Cup. I'm like, why? I don't understand why the schools have a $600 million gap in deferred maintenance, right? And so I asked the question. I was like, well, who's responsible for this? Like, who do I need to go talk to about what's going on? And it kind of got a chuckle, but I was like, no, I'm serious. Like, who needs a phone call? Who needs a visit? Because this is not okay. And then, a few phone calls later, people are like, you should run. And I fought it for the longest time. And then, after the third or fourth person that supposedly weren't connected to each other, I was like, okay, somebody's telling me something. Let me sit down and
Receive that message.
right. Let me just say, all right, I got I don't want to not listen because then it gets real loud. like, like, oh no, I got it. Message received. So
Yeah, well,
yeah.
I'm glad to see some new thinking, some new blood uh, to participate in the process. From my perspective, I before you came on, I asked you to take a look at our network,
Mm-hmm.
some of the things in our network, and I've been critical of the Kansas City School District. How can you
Mm-hmm.
have a black-owned digital media company
Mm-hmm.
with all of this information about you and your community, and you
Mm-hmm.
don't use it as a learning tool?
Right.
Uh, that's where I see we definitely need to take a look at what's going on. Like you said,
Yeah.
the deferred maintenance and the all of these. There's a lot of different things that are going on that I really think are going to change now that you have this new administration in, and I think this has been a wake up call for people of color in
Mm-hmm.
general. And if you do not have the correct programs in your district teaching your kids history, math, and what have you, there's no
Yeah.
place for them in the workforce.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
and from my perspective, there's not enough people of color, black role models that
Mm-hmm.
they actually can look at and see is even more the reason why assignments and Cascade Media Group, our educational channel and our political channel and our technology channel, that you could use as tools
Mm-hmm.
for your kids. Now, you just had about 20 minutes of looking at what we do from an educational standpoint. Do you think I'm out of line in saying what I'm saying?
No, not at all. And it actually lines up a lot with my premise for what I want to bring to the table is bringing the community back into the conversation about public education because a lot of the issues and problems, right, that we're seeing are things that we've solved before or we can solve together if we're aware of what's happening, right? So a big disconnect between the community and the engagement, right, until something goes wrong, right? When it came time for the schools to start closing buildings, you had busloads of community members showing up. But once that went away, you go to a school board meeting now, right? And there's one tonight, and you see the same faces, right? You see the same engaged parents, a couple students, and mostly the staff, right? That has to do the presentations. But we need to figure out where that gap is and we need to utilize our resources in the community. Because as I go around Kansas City, I'll meet nonprofits and groups that are doing amazing things, right? But they're not, I'm like, well, why aren't you in the schools? And they're like, well, we can't get into schools. I'm like, well, why? I'm again, my brain is sitting here. I'm like, I don't know. I don't understand. You have a great program. It's meant for kids. You got funding, but you can't get into the schools. Like, I like
It doesn't
these things
compute. It
don't make,
doesn't compute.
yeah, I was like, okay, well, and there's something to be said about the legalities of like making sure you have the right authorizations. You just don't want to open the doors and let everybody in, but like all of those things, that's meetings, right? That's meetings, that's coordination, that's the adults figuring out how to make things jive, right? But a lot of the things that I've seen are, whether they be different entities that are kind of button heads on philosophy or political positioning, right, based on a party or personal aspirations. But all of that stuff, that's taken away from the kids, right?
For
And
sure.
that's what I want to abide by, right? So we can fight, we can disagree, we can do all sorts of stuff and figure out how to work things from a policy standpoint, from an administrative standpoint. But when we're impacting what's actually going on in the classrooms, or really what's not happening in the classrooms, we have to take a step back and realize that everything about this is about not just about um, the things that we care about, it's about the kids in the future, right? So don't complain about uh, there's kids past curfew on the plaza, but we haven't funded the school since 1967, right? So these things are all related. And so you can't say, well, we need more public safety dollars, right? I was at a budget hearing last night for the second one, right? We got one more coming up. Like, you can't talk about things in isolation because all of these things are related, right? The majority of the violence in the city is perpetrated by young people. But guess what? If you look at where there are activities for them to do, there's nothing.
There's nothing. There's
Nothing.
nothing.
There's nothing. There's no arcade. There's no roller rink. There's no bowling alley. There's, like, where are they supposed to go? Right. And then the only place you have is schools. And we have community centers, but you have to pay to be a member.
And that the whole thing is uh, what has happened. Corporate America basically have taken over uh, our schools and everything, because where would you spend $200,000 to get a school board seat? Why would you spend that? That shows you there's a problem right there. School
Mm-hmm.
board is, I'm interested in education. When I came up, you had a lot of women involved. Uh, they would have their little group and they say, hey, you need to run. And that group would uh, support, and they might raise $1,500 for some signs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we can't come together, other people are running our districts. I'm critical of the superintendent and all of them. You got to predominantly people of color, and do you ask your purchasing agents uh, who's supplying milk, who's supplying this, and what are they doing in the community, and what have you? And those type questions are not asked. Number
Mm-hmm.
one, when I asked you about coming on the show, uh, you cannot do anything until you can connect with the people you claim you represent.
Correct.
You cannot connect with them in any other way besides using major media, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And that means you can't even really put a lasting campaign on because it costs so much money
Mm-hmm.
to use major media. And when you have a black-owned digital media company like Cascade that's been covering your sports and everything that you've been doing in the school district, and you don't support it financially and you don't support it in any kind of way, that shows you that you have a problem with leadership.
Mm-hmm.
When uh, connectivity is about this, and
Mm-hmm.
this does not cost our community. Everybody has a phone. So if you're using a digital network that is putting out a message on a consistent basis, and you're connecting your community to information, you went to the History Channel, you went to the Education Channel, the Political Channel. As an educator, do you think that those would have useful purpose in our community?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And this is it's exactly what we were talking about. We have to figure out how to re-engage, right? So this idea that parents aren't and I've heard it a few times, right? Where there's this notion that, well, parents don't care or they're not engaged. And I'm like, that if you're actually in the community, that is the furthest thing from the truth that I can tell you, right? Parents absolutely care about their kids and their education, right? The thing is, we also have to make sure that those parents have the same opportunity to do the things that they want to be engaged with, right? If you're working 2 and 3 jobs, it's hard to make a meeting, right, to talk about schools for an hour and you don't know half of what folks are talking about because they're talking about reports and this, like, it's not the parts that matter the most to us are so glossed over and not really dug into that it's almost it creates a reason not to go, right? Because you're like, what is the purpose? What am I
I don't
gaining?
know what's going on. I go there for
Right.
once, and they're talking about that, and then I haven't been to any of the meetings in years. They muzzle you
Mhm.
when you
Yeah,
come.
yeah.
You're out of
Mhm.
order, and all of that. But as I said about connectivity, you can't straighten anything out in our community, no matter what you're talking about, until you can get engagement from the people
Mhm.
that you say that you represent. Now we have,
Yep.
I think I asked you to look at the community organization tab on,
Mhm.
all right, so why wouldn't you, as a community organization, we have all these community organizations, and Cascade has reached out to you to come on the community organization tab at least once a month or every 2 weeks to tell your community what's going on in your specific community.
Mhm.
Now, and it's free. Now, why wouldn't you do that? I'm like, and you basically cannot interview anybody in the district really because their policy, everything is mum is the word. Get this cleared before you can't get anything done.
Yeah, there's you hit on something there. So part of the atmosphere, right? Especially in the city, in the district, within the school district, and in the community, there's a culture of like, well, we don't want to talk about, we don't want to air the dirty laundry. We don't want to talk about certain anything controversial. We want to
Right.
kind of, we need to clean it up first, right? And if you look at, and you can go across any industry, right? The 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 companies that allow people to make mistakes but allow for transparency are the ones that do the best. Because if you're in a culture of fear where you can't speak your mind, you gotta edit everything that comes down, and by the time it gets to the public, it's 3, 4 layers removed, and you're like, what is this telling me, right? Like, because it has to sound a certain way or be like, if we're not digging deep and having hard conversations, because that's what's happened. We haven't had the hard conversations internally and with the community. So now the corporations can come in, be controversial, right? Be divisive. And now outside entities can come in with dollars and political positioning and say, well, we're going to do it this way. And because folks are paying attention, because that controversy is being used as a selling point, now we're no longer in control because we've been biting our tongues, right? And not saying and having the hard conversations about the things that are happening in the schools and about what's happening across the country federally, at the state level, at the county level, at the city level, and really understanding the impact of a lot of these rules and regulation and legislations. A lot of folks are upset about November, but November didn't happen
Overnight.
in November. November has been in the works for decades, if you really paid attention, right? So what we have to do is understand where we are, look at the landscape, and start reconnecting, engaging with one another, and bringing the community back into the
But the
conversation so that we
problem
can take
is,
care of the
sorry for
children.
cutting you off, again, goes
No.
back to connectivity. You
Mm-hmm.
cannot engage your community unless you can connect with them.
Right.
And that costs a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, when you have a company like ours that can make it very easy for you to do that and you don't do that,
Mm-hmm.
there's a problem. And that's the problem with the leadership. And frankly, as far as I'm concerned, most of our middle class, and some of them think that they upper class, you just middle class, let Mr. Nelson tell you. Uh, they have moved out the community, have their kids in uh, these different private schools or what have you, and they've given up on the community. The same ones that really can help turn this around, they're
Mm-hmm.
really not involved because they don't feel that they their time would be they feel their time would be wasted trying to bring us together.
Yeah. I
And
think
that's a fact.
yeah, yeah.
And
I
how do
think
we deal with that? I think is some of the things that you laid out.
mhm.
Organizations, working with the organizations. Uh, you say you do academic uh, things
Coaching.
as it relates to
Mhm.
your mentoring and what have you.
Mhm.
And Dr. Marjorie Williams, Dr. Marge used to say, and I thought it was just a saying. She said when she had her show on our network, she would always close with, "You have to be the change you want to see.
Mhm.
You can't want other people to correct what you want to see done." And I
Yep.
think in our community, too many people have given up on the system, basically. They haven't
Mhm.
given up on the kids or what have you, but the system is broke, and we have to get some people that are genuinely caring about uh, the kids and not just
Know
caring,
how to fix it.
know
Yep.
how to fix some of this.
Mhm. Yeah. And if so that hits on so the second pillar in my campaign strategy is about the parents and the caregivers. And so the policy, right? The structure, right, already exists, right? Remember when we had PTA meetings, right?
Right.
And you actually knew what was going on and people were engaged. So that structure still exists, but it's been so
But it's broke.
encumbered and broken that there's distrust, and so now we need to re-engage. Okay, again, we have to figure out what broke it so we can go back in and fix it. But we're not willing to have the conversation, and we just can't. We're not in a point where it's like, it'd be better if we make these improvements. We're at a crisis point, right? Where we're graduating students that cannot
They
uh,
can read. They
read. Like at functional levels, right, to be competitive in the job market. So
let,
now we have workforce development, but even the workforce development partners are having trouble because we haven't laid a strong enough foundation to get them to the next level, right? And so uh, it's not just a matter of can we keep the doors open and the lights on, right? We have to make it so that opportunities are available for all of our students to excel in life. And right now we're not there.
let me say this. So I'm glad you mentioned PTA. So my son, I think Carlos Jr. is 42. I started the Boy Scout and Cub Scout in the Kansas City School District. He was
Mm-hmm.
in middle school. I was at Messervian Elementary. Our Boy Scouts and Cub Scouts, you have a meeting once a month where the
Mhm.
families come. I had the largest troops because my godfather called the capo, who had Italian Gardens. He was on the Boy Scout board, and he seen to it that when I started the program, that all the scouts, anything that they needed, the scouts provided free. And
Mhm.
I would take them camping and this and that. You had so many kids that didn't have dads at home. You had so many kids, and then you had kids raising kids.
Yeah.
I think I told you I was on the Full Employment Council, and I had good contact with the corporate community, and so I would take them camping once a month, and I would have
Mhm.
30 kids, and we go to the museums, we go to different places, the Ozarks and what have you, and you really got a taste of what was happening in your community. You have them kids
Mhm.
overnight and they talking about their family. And then what I had, you had young mothers and what have you. They would love drop their kids off on Friday and pick them up on Sunday.
Mhm.
Uh, and so again, when you talked about PTA, all of that stuff has been lost for 30 years. When I used to have my scout meeting, every parent would be there, and the principal would come down and have them uh, uh, sign in sheet like they were at a PTA meeting.
Mhm.
And they weren't at a peak. And so you have a lot of different things going on. And then, like you said, people don't want to talk about the dirty laundry. And so
Mhm.
then that just gets swept away. The paperwork goes in, and it looks like things are running. And I hadn't been in the school district for years and years, about 30 years, but I did some consulting and some things last year. I had like 10 girls in the classroom, a media class, seventh, eighth grader. All of them talking about they don't have no daddy. I'm like, you got a daddy, you might not like them. And then
Mhm.
it's a lot of things. Our families are broken, and
Mhm.
you can learn, but the kids have behavioral problems.
Yeah.
And so, you know, uh, my brief conversation with you, it seems like you recognize all of this and
Mhm.
that you're ready to try to act on it or build a coalition to
It
act on it.
has, yeah, it has to be. It can't be what it is currently, where we have all these different entities, and it's not to say that folks aren't working together, but we need to work together at a larger scale and at a long-term strategic outlook, right? So it's not one thing to have an event where you have three, four partners, right? It's, hey, here's our plan, right? So the district has a plan, but the communities aren't part of that plan, right?
That's
Where are
right.
the community plans, right, in conjunction with the district's plan to say, hey, whenever we have a shortfall or a gap, the churches are going to come in and pick up the slack, right? Or the Boy Scouts and the Big Brothers, Big Sisters, and the like, why can't we have some collaboration and really have these things laid out ahead of time so that we're not looking for, hey, I want to have a trip, I need a sponsor, right? There should be no reason why every student in KCPS has not been to City Hall, right? There's no reason that every student in KCPS shouldn't have been up to Jefferson City. There's no reason that every student in KCPS shouldn't have been over to the Black Archives right behind 18th and Vine. Or to the Negro League Museum, or like the list is so long, right? And we're worried about keeping them in the classroom because it's too hot. It's no longer healthy to be in the buildings that we're funding, right? And no matter the cost is going to come out, right? Whether we pay it up front or we pay it on the back end. And right now we're seeing the back end of years of neglect, right? We're seeing violence at a higher rate. We're seeing economic issues, and you talked about the trauma and the family structure, and a lot of these things. Again, if we built the community and supported each other, a lot of these things will take care of themselves, right? If we understand where the needs are and where the resources are, right? And
That's
it's
key,
not
where the
enough.
resources are.
Yep. And
I
they're
think
there.
a lot of resources are being misused
Mhm.
personally.
Mhm. Yeah, and then if they're not, and that's part of the communication part, right? If we're not communicating how things are being used, then nobody knows what you're doing, what you're not doing, and then no, you're not being held to account, right? So you can say I'm doing all these great things, but if nobody's seen what you're doing, then you're just saying that, and whether you are or aren't, unless you can make that tangible connection, it's gonna fall by the wayside, right? So we have to get in the room, be together, and understand how to fix some of these things, and understand that some of the problems that are being that we're being told we have, right, are blighted communities. That's a tactic. That's not, our communities are very resilient and very strong, and we need to realize that. And it's not a matter of using that to get some grant money, right? And then coming back and thinking that we have all the problems. We have stuff we need to work on, but it's because we haven't been addressing it the way we need to, and we haven't been talking to one another. We don't need to let anybody else tell us how to take care of each other.
There we go. I think I told you I started my company at DuBois Learning Center, 5501 Cleveland. Uh, Mr. Leon Dixon, I used to
Yeah.
sleep on the floor in Leon's. Myself and Alvin Sykes, we were roommates. And when I took you to Cascade Sports, you remember it said home to student athlete?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So when I started that in '08, Leon said, Nelson, how you starting sports without education? I was like, Leon, man, we talking sports. We ain't talking about no daggone education. Then he broke
Mm-hmm.
it down to me. He was like,
Mm-hmm.
uh, all these kids play sports. They're not going to the NFL. They're not going to the NBA, but they can get a scholarship that will help them get a job and learn something. And you cannot separate education from sports, especially for our community. That was a way for us to come out of poverty. And made me make sense. And since '08, we've been known as homeless student athlete. And you can't watch one interview on Cascade Sports where we don't ask the coach or the players how important is your education
Yep.
to you.
Yeah.
Because that's what can free you.
Yeah.
Information is one thing, but information applied is a whole nother
Mhm.
story.
Yeah, and then you hit on you're hitting on all the good topics. So when we talk about sports, the arts, extracurricular activities, right? So robotics, right, which is still at the boys right now, right, every Saturday.
Right.
These are programs that every single student needs access to, and that's not what's happening, right? You have pockets of 10 students here, 100 students here, maybe, right? We have 14,725 last count just in KCPS. You have just under that amount inside the charters, the other 20 charters that are in the KCPS district. And then you have 14 other school districts. There's no reason why we can't have all of these things available to all of our students as a community,
They
right?
need to be
And you have to
coordinated.
be well-rounded. You have to be well-rounded. It's not just about the math and the reading so that you can pass a state test. If you're not prepared and you're not, so there's something that sports teaches you as a person in terms of integrity, in terms of working together with others on a team, in terms of failure, in terms of winning, right? There's things about those activities that go far beyond, right, the sport itself, or even where it could take you,
Has a lot
right?
of intrinsic value.
Exactly. But if we can't give access to all of these different things and let the students figure out where they fit in, where their passion lies, then we've already set them up to fail. And then now when they failed, we're upset that they're causing problems and breaking windows and stealing cars. Well, what were they going to do? Because we didn't have anything else for them to do. What,
You have the
like
blind leading the
we're
blind. We're getting ready
we're
to.
we're gonna pay
I'm giving you a
one way or
minute to
the other.
close out.
So I think the biggest thing, we have to get engaged, civically engaged, and understand what's happening in the city, in the county, in the state, and at the federal level. And so we have a upcoming election that I'm running for school board on, but it's not just about the school board election. April elections are historically low turnouts, right? And again, November didn't happen just in November. It's been decades coming. So we need to be engaged. And just because there's not a big election in April, right? Understand that we have a public safety tax. We have all the different school board elections. We have a historic bond, right? Historic bond for Kansas City Public Schools that needs to be addressed, and we have other issues on the ballot. And it's disheartening when I'm out in the community and I'm talking to folks, and they're like, "Oh, I didn't even know about what's happening." Right? It's not just about the school board. It's not just about my candidacy. We need to get engaged civically and understand the things that are coming down, because to be upset after the fact, it does us no good. We need to get engaged now and make sure you're registered to vote. Make sure your voting registration is up to date. Make sure you have the IDs that you need. There's community groups that'll help you get the ID. There's folks that'll take you to the polls. We need to educate yourself on the ballot. It's out there. So get out and vote in April. There's no reason that it should be a historically low turnout.
All right. And as we always close, when you invest in your community, you're really just investing in yourself. Good day.
Absolutely.
This is brought to you by Kansas City Business Association, working to improve our community.